all for coming. I wanted to keep this very informal so that we can share experiences, and I can tell you what I did when I was doing my PhD. I graduated 1 year ago, so I'm not an expert in publications, but I still think that I can share with you what made this experience easier and what was hard during my PhD, and then what I feel now that I'm working at a university, at a Colombian university. So I'm actually thinking mostly about people working in South America and how you can incorporate publishing in your daily tasks. So I titled it Pitfalls and Potential: Balance Between Good Quality and High Impact Publications During Your Doctorate. So I would like for you to share if you have any experiences after I finished. And I thought of this presentation as an introductory presentation before the others that are going to talk to me. So the structure of the PhD program in Colombia is 4 or 5 years long, and then basically during the first 2 years During the first 2 years you do your coursework, you study, you're mostly reading, or you structure your PhD pre-project. So you're mostly studying. And then you do field work or data obtention, you do lab work, and you're supposed to start writing during that time. So you're doing full-time research for 2 or 3 years, depending on how long it takes you. Some people take 7 years, 6 years, but I would say between 4 and 5 is the usual time. So then you're supposed to write before you graduate. You have to have at least 1 published article and 1 submitted article, and then a normal number of articles or papers is 3 when you want to graduate. So here you finish your PhD, and you're very happy because you finished it, but you still have to continue writing because most of the data that you obtain during your PhD is actually just in progress, or you're just working on the papers and finishing many things. So this is actually, writing does not end when you finish your PhD. In fact, almost nothing ends when you finish your PhD. You do graduate and you finish your program, but it's the beginning of your research, your life as a researcher, and you have to think that most things will continue. This will open the doors for you to continue working on a subject. So you don't have to see it as the end of, like the ultimate goal of your life. You have to see it as a step, and then you're going to continue working and writing. And not only does almost nothing end when you finish your PhD, but many things start. So at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about some other things that happen for many people, when you finish your PhD, and how that interferes with publishing specifically. So I intended this talk for students, postgraduates, and mostly Colombian or Latin American students, because I think you'll face many similar issues when trying to publish or trying to write. And I wanted to make a list of things that you should consider when you're doing your PhD that might help you avoid some of the problems or obstacles for publishing. So the first thing I would say is very important is that at the beginning of your PhD program you should planify and think of each of the goals, each of the questions should be a publishable article. So in Colombia, many people, and I think worldwide maybe, many people still think about PhD thesis as one big question, and that these big questions are very hard to publish because papers are short and they have a limited number of words, so you can't turn this into papers, publishable papers. So you should think about research questions that are feasible in the time that you have, and that you can answer in this format, in a paper format. You should structure that from the very beginning so that you're not having trouble at the end trying to fit a huge question into 5 pages. And don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you have several questions, then you should try to keep these questions independent, and they should have like the lab work and the field work and everything that you have to do in order to get the data for those papers should be independent. Because if they're all interdependent, or if they all depend on each other, then you will end up not publishing before when the time comes up to graduate. Because you can't publish one paper because the other one is in work, and so it's better to have like independent goals and be able to finish one thing and then start the other. That's my opinion. And then writing is not something that you're born, like publishing is not something that you're born with. You have to learn how to do it, and you have to have people who teach you how to do it, and you have to find training for yourself, like training for you to learn how to do that. And in my opinion, it's better to get like formal training. So you should find a scientific writing course in your university, or if you're going to visit another university during visit, I don't know, most PhD programs include a visit to some other institution, so you should find a course in your home institution or elsewhere, and this should help. Like in my case, it helped. And reading many papers helps. Revising others' works, even if it's your peers' work, your friends' articles, you learn a lot from seeing what the mistakes that others make. So this is something you should do on a regular basis. Revise others' work and see what they're doing wrong, what you would change that helps you not make the same errors. And then always have some other person revise your work. It can be your friends, but it should also be more experienced researchers that can thoroughly revise your work, so that you can understand what are the real errors that you're making and how to make your writing experience more positive and better. Another thing that I think is always a problem is editing. So this is something that we're not taught during the PhD program many times, or in your pre-graduate studies. So it's a good thing to learn and master editing tools, like learn how to work with references and understand all the formats of the figures and the formats for images. That helps a lot, because many articles are rejected because they're not in the right format, or they're not even taken into account because the formatting is just not right. So try and understand the figure quality formats, and try to use specialized software for citing and references, because it's impossible when you have a list that's 50 references long. It might be very hard to not make any mistakes in any of the references if you're not using a specialized software to do this. And something that might be evident for many people, I think is not that easy, is following the instructions to the authors. Each journal has its own instructions for the authors, and sometimes you just don't know what they want, or you don't understand these instructions. So you shouldn't do this alone. If you don't understand what those instructions are, if you're not being able to follow the instructions carefully, then maybe you should do your best and then hand it over to someone else that has experience doing this, formatting articles for the specific journals, so that they can check that you've done a good job. So the message is, don't do any of these things alone. The article should always go back and forth, so that you can receive feedback on how you're doing this job. Your supervisors are, of course, very, very important for publishing during your PhD program. So many times when you're trying to look for a PhD and you're a good student, so you can apply to a good program, you feel tempted to find the supervisor that's the most famous or has the best reputation, and of course that's very important. The high level is important, but availability is also very important. So if you need to learn how to write and how to publish, and then you're not going to receive any feedback from your supervisor because he's too busy, then maybe it's not the best choice for you. So you have to make sure that that person will actually be available and will be able to revise your work thoroughly and go through all the details in your manuscript, so that it has a good chance of being published. So, and co-authorship, this is, I think, something that's difficult many times. And when you're a PhD student, you think that you can't really choose, that if others want to be in your paper, you kind of have to accept because you're the student. But if the people are going to be co-authors, if they're going to participate in the article, they should really participate. Really, this should be an honest thing that they earn. So the co-author should always read and revise your work thoroughly and go through the manuscript, but also participate in other phases of your work. So it shouldn't be like someone's there because someone else worked with him or he worked many years ago on that subject. It should really be an earned position. And this, I think, really has to do with you choosing for yourself good co-authors that will help you in this experience of publishing, and also choosing learning experiences instead of masterpieces from the very beginning. So you have to be realistic about the publication process. At first, you should probably start with little or smaller goals and have co-authors that can help you go through those early phases of publishing and then prepare for the bigger challenges. And then something this is out of personal experience, when you're doing your PhD and when you finish your PhD, many things happen at the same time in your personal life. So it's not like you can dedicate 120% of your time to publishing. Many things happen. You have to find a job, or find a postdoc, and many people get married or move or have children, or they find a new job. And these things take time, so you have to be also realistic about how much time you can really spend on the publication process. And if you find a new job in Colombia, and I would say in other Latin American countries, you have to make sure that in your work plan, because we all make work plans when we're hired at a university, there are some hours for publication. When you're hired at a university, you have to do many other things like administration work and paperwork, and you have to teach, and you have to buy stuff for the labs, and you have to do many, many things. So you have to make sure when you talk to your director or to your superior that some weekly hours are dedicated to publishing, because if not, it becomes impossible. You're just overwhelmed with all the work that's coming, and then the years start to pass and you haven't published. One thing I would say during your PhD is to try to have some months after graduating or postponing your graduation a bit so that you can work on all the data that you obtained during your PhD. Because during your PhD, you're very excited and you want to do many things and you have lots of data, but then you have to graduate and then you don't have time to publish all those papers. And if you find a job right afterwards, then you have to assume big challenges, and you just leave all that you did during your PhD behind. And that shouldn't happen unless you find a job where you can actually have some hours for publishing. That's very important. And it has to come from you, because universities here, most of the hours that you're hired for are for administration, as I said, or teaching, so you really have to manifest that intention to your superior, like to your boss, and tell him that you want some, or her that you want some hours for publishing specifically. And something that will come, I would leave to Wolf, because he's going to talk about this, but I just want to introduce it. It's normal to be rejected. It's the most normal process. You send your first article and it's rejected, and that fear of rejection, in many cases, causes students not to submit their articles. So they write their articles and they hold on to their articles for many months because they're afraid that the paper will be rejected. But if it is rejected, then you will get back many interesting insights into that paper, so it will make the paper grow. So it's not that big of a deal, and Wolf will continue with this topic.
a reviewer's perspective, because this is really just my view on peer review, and it might not be generally applicable, but I hope it will still be useful. Yeah, so I guess you're all more or less familiar with the peer review process. Anyway, just a very quick introduction. When you finish your manuscript and you feel that it is ready to be published, then you submit it to a journal, where it is usually going in one or the other way, past the editor-in-chief, and then assigned to an editor who is handling the manuscript. And the handling editor, who might have different names like associate editor, or depends on the journal what that guy is called, is a really central figure, because he appoints a number of reviewers, usually 2 or 3, sometimes more, sometimes less, who are asked to read your paper, comment on your paper, make a recommendation. And normally, in our field, you don't know who that is, which makes things interesting. There are other systems where the reviewer's identity is known, and sometimes reviewers decide to make their identity known, but as a default, they're anonymous. And the idea with all of this is to have sort of quality control. And it's a quality control both on behalf of the journal that doesn't want to publish rubbish, so they want to be sure that your paper is good, but it's also quality control for you, because you don't want to publish rubbish either, and people make mistakes. So it's really good to get feedback from somebody who's neutral because you don't know who it is, so they can say everything they want, basically, without making you cross, personally. So this is a good thing, not just for the journal, it's also a good thing for you. So you should, in general, have a positive attitude to peer review. And just an attempt to make this a little bit maybe more objective than just my personal experience, I went through a number through reviewing forms from a number of journals that I happened to have reviewed for, and tried to compile what kind of questions the journals usually ask their reviewers. What do the journals want to know about your paper? And there are several broad categories. Maybe the most important and at the same time scariest one is novelty and interest. So the journal would typically ask the reviewer, do you find the paper interesting? That's kind of a killer if the answer is no. Will the paper interest the broad readership of journal of whatever? That's a little bit less personal. Does the manuscript contain new and significant information to justify publication? That's basically, are you doing something that somebody else has already done, or is this new? Does the paper pose a new and significant problem? That's slightly different. It's not just about, for example, new data on something that other people have already studied. Is this something solid? Is this a conceptual advance? Does the paper change the ways people think about the topic even more in that direction? And does the paper report data already published or in press? So that's basically saying you're not supposed to submit your stuff to several places and get it published several times. That's one category of questions that are being asked by the journal. Then, of course, there's the important block of quality of the science, which should be pretty obvious. Is the problem significant and concisely stated? Is this worth studying? And are you framing it in the right way? Are the experimental and or theoretical methods described comprehensively? So are you actually explaining what you're doing? Are the methods all right? Are the stats okay? Do you adequately present what you have found? And are your conclusions supported by the results and not exceeding the results? So you're not supposed to claim stuff that your results don't support. And of course, a very important point, are you citing the relevant literature, which can be quite tricky depending on which review you get. And then there is the equally important category of format and presentation, Are title, abstract, keywords, and introduction appropriate and informative? And I'm going to get back to that because that is really, really central. Is the length of the paper justified, or are you talking too much about your study? That happens. I tend to do that. Is the problem concisely stated? I'm repeating that. That's both about the science, but it's also about the presentation. Is the language clear, logical, concise, and direct? So is this a pleasure to read, or is it really quite no? And what about the structure? Is the structure of the paper okay, or should it be rearranged, expanded, or condensed in one or the other way? And then about the figures and tables. Are the figures and tables good enough technically, and are they appropriate and are they necessary? People submit manuscripts with too many figures or too many tables. That happens. Journals don't like that. And the other way around, is there anything additional required to make the paper more easy to understand? And those things are, when as a reviewer you're asked to evaluate those things, you're usually confronted with three things. You're confronted with a questionnaire that contains all or a subset of those questions in one or the other variety. And you're also confronted with a free text field where you can tell the editor what you think about the paper without the authors knowing. There's another free text field where you can tell the authors anything you want about the paper. That's basically where you make suggestions how the paper could be improved if you don't think it's already brilliant. People never tend to think that the paper is already brilliant. And then you can recommend a decision, which is quite important, obviously. It's important to stress that the editor doesn't necessarily follow the decision. So it's really up to the editor to make the decision, but you can recommend one as a reviewer. And the standard outcomes are outright rejection, saying this is no good, don't publish it. This is not good at the moment, but the authors might be able to do something about it and are welcome to submit it again to the same journal. If you get this, you can never submit it again to the same journal. Oh, sorry. This is a little bit less critical, so it is possibly good enough for the journal after some major work being done, or after some minor work being done, or in rare cases, the reviewer might just say, oh, this is brilliant. Publish it. Go for it. It rarely happens. It rarely happens in the first go. I mean, it happens usually after some rounds of revision, major or minor. So all this sounds like a pretty efficient system, well-oiled machinery, anonymous reviewers and all that. But I think it would be a mistake to understand it entirely as a system, because there's persons involved. The reviewers are really persons, and it's important to think about it that way as well. So the reviewers are supposed to be scientists, your peers, with a relevant expertise in the same field as your paper, and no conflict of interest. And that means they shouldn't be competing with you scientifically. They shouldn't have any economic interests in your results being published or not published. They shouldn't be your brother, sister, wife, boss, anything like that. And normally, it's also kind of as a rule of thumb, it should definitely not be your former supervisor or somebody you have supervised formally, and it shouldn't be your close collaborators either. But I'll get back to that later. So how are reviewers chosen? That's quite an important point, because you don't tend to get random reviewers. Reviewers tend to be people the editor knows. I get quite a lot of review requests from people who know me and who are handling manuscripts. Reviewers are chosen by matching with the journal's database. So you often, when you publish something with the journal, you inevitably end up in the journal's database, and then the editor will basically just run a search on the keywords of your paper that will be reviewers suggested. So this is purely a thematic relationship. There is no personal relationship involved. People who are cited in the paper, the reviewer might say, okay, this is very heavily cited in the paper. Those guys are obviously qualified to review the paper. But a very, very important mechanism is that you are often encouraged to suggest reviewers to review your paper. And that should be done, and that should be done very carefully. You should make sure that you don't suggest your wife or your supervisor or somebody who has a conflict of interest, because those people will decline. And when they decline, it's getting out of hand for you. So they're often asked to suggest somebody else, but that could be a completely random person. So if you really want to influence who gets to review your paper, suggest somebody who makes sense. And that should be somebody you should be thinking about who is scientifically qualified to judge that paper, because you want to have somebody who actually is qualified to appreciate your results. For all the other mechanisms, you might get somebody who is somehow related, somehow qualified in that field, but not really for the kind of thing you're doing. And that may lead to all sorts of weird things. I mean, people just the reviewer may just not understand what you're doing or not appreciate it in the right way. So don't think too much about whether that's a nice person or somebody you don't like or something like that. Think about who is actually qualified to submit your paper, to review your paper. That would be my recommendation on this. And it's really important to keep in mind that reviewers are volunteers. They're doing this for free. They don't get anything for it. And so they're basically doing you a favor. You're relying on the reviewers for the publication process. And they will provide you with valuable feedback. So, and as a corollary of this, reviewers don't have any interest in rejecting your paper. They're not evil. They're usually not particularly in favor of your paper either. They're just neutral. And they're doing you a favor. They're looking at it. And they're trying to make sure that everything is going the right way. But because they're volunteers and they're having loads of other things on their plate, they want to get it done as quickly as possible. So make it easy for them. Just a very quick overview of reasons for negative reviews. Negative reviews happen, they happen a lot. And maybe the number one reason for rejections, I should have actually said reasons for rejection, is that your paper is considered to be not novel enough or not interesting enough for that journal of groundbreaking super science that you've decided to submit to, be it Nature, be it PNAS or whatever. When you're trying high, you will get that kind of rejection. That's sometimes caused by the editor, but it's often also by the reviewers, but it's often also handled through a mechanism called editorial rejection, where the editor not even bothers to send your paper to review. Yeah. Then, of course, there might be something wrong with your research. You never know. I mean, that happens. And then a really important one is it's just not well enough presented. The reviewer just doesn't get it. And that's something that you can relatively easily do something about. And that's sort of the main point of what I'm trying to convey here today. Another possible reason is the reviewer isn't insufficiently expert. You can do something about that, like I said, by suggesting appropriate reviewers and hoping that they get the paper. You may get an inexperienced or insecure reviewer who just thinks he or she has to be very critical. Also, that happens. Not really anything you can do about that, except not suggesting people who you suspect could be acting like that. And you could get a conflicted or malicious reviewer, in principle, although in reality I would say that almost never happens. So I think the top three here are the things that really regularly happen and that you have to worry about. How do you prevent that kind of stuff from happening? Happy reviewers are nice reviewers. They're volunteers, they don't want to use a lot of time, so make it easy for them. Make it easy and make it fun. Because I like to review papers because I get to see new and exciting work before everybody else. And if it's nicely written, and if it's exciting, I love doing it. But if I get a paper that is written in a boring and tedious style, and it takes a lot of time getting to the point, and I have to read it 4 times to understand what has been done, it's not so much fun, and I might regret it. I might regret having said yes to the review. So do avoid that. And first impressions are really crucial. So often when people are invited to review a paper, they're getting 2 things. They're getting the title and they're getting the abstract. And what you really want, especially when you suggest reviewers who you think are experts, you really want those people to say yes. So you want to have a really good title and you want to have a really good abstract. And that's something that people don't always do. That's something that's often neglected. So people write the paper and then they're happy with the paper and then they remember, okay, oh, I also have to do an abstract. Let's do that quickly. And that's really not very smart, because this is when your favorite reviewer says, oh no, I don't want to review that. Let's pass it on to somebody else. And then you get somebody who's not really qualified. So worry about the abstract and do worry about the title. Yeah, excellent. And then the other thing is, as I said, as a reviewer, I want to review something that's fun to read and that's exciting to read. So do optimize your language, style, and structure of the paper. And this is basically just to say, if the reviewer is in doubt, if the reviewer doesn't get the point, it's going to be used against you. So they're not going to assume it is good if they don't understand it. In doubt, they're going to assume it's bad. Or just say they don't understand it, which is a killer. I mean, if even the reviewer doesn't understand it, how is the reader supposed to understand it? So language. I think language is really crucial. Bad English makes reviewing difficult. Gives you a grumpy reviewer who might look with like a negative attitude at all the rest of your paper, including your methods, including your science. Bad English looks incompetent, makes the reviewer more critical. Even if the one thing doesn't have anything to do with the other, it's again about first impressions. And bad English masks the quality of your science. So you get an unimpressed reviewer who doesn't get all of the excellence of your science. So this is really important. I know from personal experience that this is a big challenge for people who don't have English as their mother tongue. I don't, and most in this room don't. And it's very important to get this right. We just have to live with it, that English is the language that we have to publish in, and optimize it. Do not leave the language editing to the reviewer. That's an attitude that I think people sometimes have, because some editors do correct language quite heavily. So people submit papers that aren't edited for the language and just look at the review will do it. Some reviewers will. Others will just say, oh, I can't be bothered, and by the way, this is a bad paper. Instead, try to get, if you're not fully confident that you're writing perfect English, perfect style, do get your co-authors to edit the paper for the language, and ask them explicitly to do that. And especially the most experienced co-author who you think writes the best scientific English. And if you have the money, it's a good thing to use an editing service. I've done that many, many times, and it really helps. But be critical about the editing service, because sometimes they mess up your paper. I've also tried that, because scientific English is not always easy to understand for people who are not absolutely within that area that you're working on. So you might get corrections by the editing service that actually make your paper wrong or worse. So be critical about that. And now, a really important point. I mean, I said this is especially challenging for non-native English speakers. But actually, I have seen papers that were really, really badly written by native English speakers. So they're not free. They're not free from that challenge. And everybody should really make sure that you write good English. That you're native English speaker doesn't mean you're good at writing. It's just something that has to be learned. And you're learning it by getting a lot of feedback. So seek out that feedback. It's got to make the review process more positive for you. Another important thing is style. Be confident but not arrogant. Don't overstate the novelty of your paper. That's may annoy people quite strongly. Don't try to make spurious links to important things. I mean, they're just standard things that are happening. Everybody tries to write climate change at least once in their papers, and it's just not. If it just doesn't make sense, it's not going to be very good. Be concise and simple. Just because it's more complicated, it doesn't look more scientific and it doesn't look smarter. Make as simple sentences as possible. Really, it's going to make it easier for you, it's going to make it easier for the reviewer, it's going to make it easier for the reader. Be consistent, informative, use of abbreviations, units, whatever. Avoid numbers in the text at any cost. I've seen things, especially in results sections, where people write, and then we found this value for this, and then that value for that, and that value for that. It's really impossible to read, especially think about that the reviewer is getting the manuscript in a double line space format with line numbers, and the paragraph with 10 numbers or something like that is going to be spread over 1.5 pages, and it's going to be horrid to read. If you have anything more than 2 or 3 numbers, make a table. Tables are good. And do follow, as Maria said, do follow the author's guidelines. It's really crucial, although I have to admit, as a reviewer, I usually don't care. I don't check for like style. I don't check if it conforms to the journal style, but the journal will. So you will run into trouble if you don't do that. And structure is the third thing that is really, really important. Structure makes reviewing easy, allows the reviewer to understand your paper, and it saves space. So you want a short paper, you better get a good structure. Use paragraphs wisely, not too many, not too few, and make sure they're really coherent. And my secret weapon when I'm using paragraphs is that no matter if the journal allows it or not, I use paragraph headings for every paragraph. And if the journal doesn't allow them, I chuck them out afterwards before I submit the paper. But one really common mistake that I see in papers is that people just make random paragraphs because everybody makes paragraphs, but there is no logical structure in them. So every paragraph should be on one clearly circumscribed topic, and that's just so much easier if you put a headline in it. Delete it afterwards if you don't like it. And be really strict about the mandatory structure of the paper. Introduction, material, methods, results, and discussion. Personally, I hate it if I find discussion-y things in the results section and vice versa and things like that. It makes it easier for you. It actually makes it easier for you. And I really like it if the structure of the introduction and the discussion is matched. So you go through certain things in your introduction, then you analyze them in materials and methods and results, and then you take them up one by one again in the discussion. So when the reader or the reviewer goes through the discussion, he or she recognizes those things and gets answers to the points that have been raised in the introduction. And that goes partially also for the results. That's not always possible, but it's also nice to have those things like broken up the same way as results. And yeah. One really important part, as Gloria said, about review is that you will get your paper rejected. Everybody does.
Doesn't interest you, because then it'll just be a chore, because this goes back to my main tenet in science and why we're all here, is because it's fun, because we're interested in it and we're excited by it. So certainly don't do projects just to finish your PhD or get that paper. Do projects that interest you, that you don't mind working at after hours on, that you don't mind, oh hey, I guess I should help, maybe I'll wake up early on Saturday morning and do that. You will only be able to accomplish that and have work-life balance if those projects excite you. Multitasking. So I recommend, for students explicitly, I didn't write this explicitly for students, so I'm kind of changing it on the fly because I want to get my message across to you, is that for multitasking, my first tenet to tell you today is that your primary work is your priority. You may get involved in other projects, you may help your supervisor, you may help your committee member with research, but it is really important to identify your priorities. And your priority is your work. Anything that you're first author on, or anything that's part of your dissertation or master's or undergraduate thesis work. And that primary work could be your project or your current paper. This is also going to evolve. If you're not a student, for example, myself, I'm currently a postdoc, I have work that is my primary work, and that is my priority, and it takes precedence over anything else that I'm working on. One thing that I've really learned in my current position in Sweden is the wonderful idea of a writing cave. And with this, I'd like to describe that it's really important that you find blocks of times to write. And within that block of time, you focus una cosa a la vez, right? One thing at a time. And during that time, there's no checking Facebook, WhatsApping my boyfriend or whatever, or talking to colleagues, or exchanging data on your FTP server. It could be the whole gamut of things that you can use to distract yourself. And that's exactly what the writing cave is, and that's exactly what I've learned from my current supervisor, Alexandre Tonelli, is that he literally just shuts his door, there's no knocking, there's no phone, there's no nothing. He is sitting down and writing. And so that's what I've been really doing, and I've found that in the past few months that I've been very productive because I'm implementing that idea. So to repeat the una cosa a la vez thing, is that these things should be clearly identified. You're not going to I'm going to write that paper in my writing cave. No, you're not going to write that paper in your writing cave. You need to clearly identify what you're going to do in that one block of time, which is your priority. For example, it needs to be something tenable. So, for example, I'm going to write the methods section of this one paper within 4 hours on Friday. And it really has to be explicit. And if you don't meet your goal, that's also fine. And that's when we meet our goals best, when they're self-implemented. So when we give ourselves tasks, we do them better. When we're given tasks, we do them poorly. Okay. So it's all about being self-motivated and finding what is the one task that you can complete in that block of time feasibly, and being okay with the fact that maybe you don't finish it. And then this is also a personal thing. I'm a list person. I guess I'm a taxonomist, so I like order. But I maintain lists, and I have lists, and I recommend this to all the students that I supervise and mentor. I have lists of current projects and my contributions to each one, so I know that I'm up to date on each project, so I know that I'm not leaving Henrik there waiting for months and months and months with this thing that I said I was going to contribute, but I've disappeared on. Okay, so these lists help me multitask, and I suggest that you can do the same. I have lists of things I need to do. I have lists of each of my contributions to each of my projects so that I can meet my deliverables, because we don't want to make other people involved in our projects unhappy. And one thing I've just recently really enjoyed about a cooperative experience I've recently had with a few people in this room, actually, that's important to remember is that just because you're first author doesn't mean you can't move things along. And that's what lists can help you do. So that just because you're not the first author or the leading author on that paper doesn't mean you can't bug people and remind people that we're working as a team and we all need to cross that finish line together, not just the first author. So then I wanted to continue the multitasking list and address not just students, but talk about things that can happen the further along you get in your career. And I'm not that far along in my career myself, but what I do think about that transition for me between PhD and postdoc is that with multitasking, I've become much better at gauging where each of the projects I'm working on is currently at and when my contribution is necessary. So how long I can wait to deliver that thing or not is very important, because we really we don't want to It'll hold other people up in publishing their work. I've also found that I've become a lot better in making suggestions as to what I can do to contribute to improve a project. So maybe I'm having a cup of coffee with somebody and they're close to submitting, and I said, well, that's so interesting, and hey, if we added this, that could be a really interesting contribution, maybe we could work on it together. So I feel as with multitasking, as you go along in your career, you find what good and interesting improvements can be made in projects. I've also found with working efficiently can increase the further along in the career you get with multitasking. You get less bogged down. So, and then lastly, you can find that you relax with this ever-growing list of things to do. So you can all look forward to the fact that your list of things to do will increase, but you will feel better about that soon. So what is co-authorship? So actually, I personally, most of my papers are first authored. I only really became co-author in very recent years. I'd actually say 2013 might have been the first time that any of my papers were co-author papers. And so when I had to think a little bit about exactly what co-authorship was to be able to share with you today. And one thing to stress is that it's no longer approved to have people just be on your paper, like honorary authors, just because of the systematic expert in the field, or because they pay for your supplies, or because they're your boss, as has already been mentioned today. Co-authors need to contribute, and often they should be contributing in more than one way. And funding is not always a contribution. They need to also be making significant contributions in other manners. And actually the journal, one of my favorite journals, Molecular Ecology, actually explicitly states that honorary authorship is not allowed in that journal. It's very useful that author tasks are defined within the papers at the end, and that they should often be set up early within the project. So again, if you read papers in molecular ecology at the end, after acknowledgements, they say what everybody did, you know? And so these people conceived the project, these people generated data, and thinking about that before you start can really avoid conflict in the future. And again, to stress, co-authors don't lead the project, co-authors don't write the entire paper for you, nor do they do the administrative work associated with submitting or addressing reviews. Co-authors are making contributions, but these types of tasks are solely responsible of the first author. Co-authors usually assist the lead author with contributions concerning data generation or analysis and/or writing. And also, one thing that I think we should all strive for in our scientific research is that all authors on whatever paper it is should be able to present, for example, an oral presentation on that project. We should all know the ins and outs of all those data and results to be able to interestingly and well present those results. There are a lot of benefits of co-authorship. So being a co-authorship allows you to think more broadly and often in an interdisciplinary manner. It allows you to work with more people that are potentially thinking about things differently than you do. It also increases your impact and visibility and represents another publication, which is really the currency we work in. We don't work in pesos or euros, we work in papers, right? But I would like to add the caveat that you need to weigh each co-authorship opportunity very carefully, because it can be a catch-22, and in that, I say that to mean that sometimes it can be a lot more work than you think it is. You say, oh, I'll just run that phylogenetic analysis for you, or oh, I'll just do that field work for you and score those morphological characters for you. But that can also explode in your face and take over other things that you need to prioritize. So you need to weigh each of these opportunities closely and again prioritize exactly your own personal research. And then the importance of social networks in science. This is the last topic I was asked to approach. And this also took a little thought. Social networks, I wasn't sure if you meant like Facebook or exactly what that meant. But I think it's important that to realize that none of us work in a vacuum. You may be the expert on aeroids of Boyacá, Colombia, but that doesn't really matter because you also don't work in a vacuum. You can be the only one that knows the species you work on, but that doesn't mean that you're alone. None of us work in a vacuum. And it's important to realize that working with your friends is really fun, and being social with your colleagues creates understanding and fosters better science. So getting along is important, and working together is important, and collaboration fosters better science. Social networks, and I interpreted this to mean internet social networks to facilitate science. And these are two just little snippets of myself, of when I thought about myself, is that honestly, I read my friends' papers more than anybody else's, right? And because of that, to be honest, I probably disproportionately cite my friends more than the general pool of papers. So post your successes on Facebook. If you've got a new publication or an interesting result, there's no reason why you shouldn't share that in your Twitter account. Send out press releases on your new papers to get media coverage. The more people that are reading about your new species from the Caatinga, or the more people that are knowing that you got that science paper, the better, because they're going to cite you. And again, I also think that social networks can be really good for organizing fieldwork and getting assistance with analyses. I know that recently I was having some issues when I updated to Yosemite on my Mac, and I just threw it up there, for example, on Facebook, and I had 20 responses in like 5 minutes. I mean, I could literally, if I was friends with all of you and I said, hey, I'm going to be in, Pamplona, Santander on Sunday or whatever, I'm sure between all of us, you could all find me 10 people to help, right? That's an important part of social networking, not just for, keeping up with who's who, but also for our science. So when I then think on the whole, now that I've finished the exact questions I was actually supposed to respond to, I thought I'd just reiterate a few of some of my main points. Is that I guess if you're to have a publication strategy, you should remember that maintaining a strong work-life balance is essential. And that if you're unhappy, you're not going to be productive. And work-life balance is essential to that. It's essential to all parts of your science, including your publication strategy. And another thing that I want to touch on is that there's an ever-increasing emphasis on papers. And I think that there's also something that's occurring within science that's really emphasizing quantity and not necessarily quality. And I think both of these things need to be recognized and avoided. It doesn't mean we all need to publish in science to be impactful, but we don't need necessarily 10 papers. We need one good one. And that's what matters, and that's what people are going to read, and that's what people are going to, that's going to reflect on your scientific future. So I think that's important. And again, I think we need to remember to keep it fun and to always learn new things, because I just learned so much from listening to Wolf about peer review and José about publication strategy. So let's remember that just because we finish our master's degree or just because we got that postdoc means it's over. Because again, we need to have fun, and having fun is learning new things. So I think that's all on that. Yeah, thanks.
If we can do something about ourselves, like preparing good manuscripts and reviewing and how to learn, I think maybe one way of practicing this is when you get a request from a journal to review a paper, you can take those questionnaires and you can look at your own paper and look at it from that perspective. So you read your own paper from the reviewer's point of view. I think that could be a really good idea. So anyway, the impact factors and open access, I'll say something about impact factors. We all are, in the last few years, it has happened in United States and in Europe a lot, and it's happening now also in Latin America and in Asia, that people's careers depend on the amount of papers they publish and on the impact factor of the journal in which they publish. So that's something which has been invented by administrators, and they do that because it's something that can be measured. It's called bibliometry, and it's something they can do with computers and the programs, and then they can rank people and see how productive they are in terms of writing papers and how much impact these papers have. So that's over us, and it creates this idea of writing too many papers, like Rod says, and just looking for strategies where we can publish as many papers as possible in journals of highest impact factor. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they are good papers. It just means that they are cited a lot, and they can be cited for many reasons, not because they are influential, but of course they are administrators. They don't care. They just see your papers are being cited so many times, so that's what matters. But in this whole development, which is not so old, it's just the last 10 years or so it has been happening. The administrators have forgotten that quality of work as an academic is many other things than publishing papers. I think impact factor or impact, it's good to look for impact because we all want to encourage work that has impact, but it's a very narrow view to see that impact is only from the papers you publish. In my own case, as an old man now, and I have been teaching in the universities, I think the greatest impact I have had has been to collaborate with young scientists and help them get through their theses and publish their theses and get a job and move along with a job and do something in the community. So when I think about the papers I have published, I value them much less than I value to come to like a conference like this one and see many people I have worked with and people I do work with, and maybe some people I will work with. I think that's a much bigger impact, and it's not measured in our system. In a few months ago, we had a conference in Copenhagen which touched upon this theme, and I heard about some project in the UK where in the humanities they were also fed up with this impact thing, because also the humanities are suffering compared to the natural science, because the natural science get most of the paper because of all these impact factors. So they decided in the research council there to make a more broad measure of impact, and actually they asked people themselves to fill out every 3 years or so a form where they could mention what they had done and what impact it had, what the relation was to society, and how the work they did, how that impacted society one way or the other. And now the research, the Humanities Research Council in the UK, they use this for deciding who are doing the writing and who will get the money. So it's not a bibliometric thing anymore, but it's something that relates to quality of work. And I think that's really nice. I hope I can encourage my Danish colleagues to look at that and maybe try to implement it. And any other country, I think it would be good to get out of this bibliometric craze that is so precise relative to the real impact of what we do. So anyway, that was good to get that, and now I have said something about impact, so I can go on to the next question, which was open access. I think that's also something that's over us a lot. And of course, if we think back on Martius and Humboldt and those guys, the world was quite different at that time. They published big folio books, and they had to go and find money for for printing, and they had big expenses for the artwork. And then sometimes they could sell these books, and some of them, like the Flora Brasiliensis, was pre-subscribed, so they had subscriptions to these things, and it was quite a different world where the author himself was often very much involved in the whole process of publishing his work and funding the publication. Then, over the past 100 years or so, these big companies have developed, and we all know Springer, Elsevier, Wiley, and or several more of them. Especially in Europe, we have these big companies which specialize in picking up journals from different professional societies and making them into a business. And they are tremendously efficient, and they sell journals sometimes which have the yearly subscription price of $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000, and the university libraries, they cannot afford not to subscribe because they have to support their researchers. So these companies become giants and very strong economic factors in the publication. And the rest of us, we would write the paper, we get our salary from the university, we get our grant from the funding agency who paid all the expenses for the research. And then when we submitted our paper to the journal, they said, oh, please sign this form. And then there was a lot of writing with small letters, and we signed that the journal could have the copyright. And many of us, we didn't know all the details and the implications of copyright. So we just gave our work to the company, which then made tremendous profits. And like Elsevier, they would earn more money than the entire university library system of the state of California. So it was a crazy situation. The science, which was funded by public funds from the government, paid our salaries and paid our grants, and then we just gave it away to someone who would make profit about it. And people became weary about this. Many high-level people also, they thought it was not fair, and many of others who were involved, when we discovered what was actually going on, we became morally or ethically offended and said, this is too bad, what can we do? But we want to publish our paper, so we sent them to the journals anyway and gave them the copyright, so we could have our impact factor and we could have our list of publications and so forth. But this was changed, and the idea of open access became strong, and a little bit, mostly in natural sciences, but also in some of the other fields, and not the same degree in all fields, mostly in physics and chemistry, and not so much in biological science. But there was a strong movement against this giving away publicly funded work and letting someone profit from it. So this idea of open access to make all this research, all this effort, they should be made freely available to the society, which had paid for it. It should have free access, open access to the results of research. So these open access journals started to appear, and they are often peer-reviewed journals, and it's most commonly natural sciences and so. But of course there are many questions related to this. Now we've heard about the quality control, the review process that Wolf mentioned that there's a problem of property rights. Who owns this? We used to just sign the copyright to the company, but who owns it in a different system with open access, and also it doesn't become free to produce the publications. It still has a cost, so there has a money part of it that still has to function out somehow. So all those things have to be resolved. Now I just resolved here. Monitor.
Bottom one.
Okay. So, so the idea of open access is that it's not those who read the papers who pay for it. You all know nowadays with the computer, we find a paper on the internet and then we want to read it, and oops, $39.65 on your credit card. It could be paid by the author or by the institution who employs the author. Then this could be distributed to the world without any cost to the reader. And that's a very interesting idea. Of course, some say, oh, it's just a matter of rearranging things and pushing the cost on someone else. And for the authors, it's also difficult because who has $1,000 to pay for a journal to do an open access? And then when you work in the third world, I don't know if Colombia is the third world, is it? The developing world. It doesn't look like it in this hotel, but maybe there are other parts, and maybe your institutions are still poor and don't have all the subscriptions, and it makes a barrier between sometimes the research which is done, where it's relevant, and who can read it. I know our good friend Rodrigo Bernal, it's one issue that he's very concerned about, and we have often discussed a publication in open access about open access, and he feels very strongly that in Colombia and in other countries in this region, it's a lot of information which is being withheld from those people who need it because of the economic cost of accessing scientific data. So open access in this way is a way of changing the cost of publication, and then those people who do the research or the employers, the institutes, they should take care of funding this, and then the money will go around the companies. Oops. And all these ideas have attracted a lot of attention, and there have been several big meetings about it in Budapest and Wetzlar and Berlin some 10, 15 years ago, and there were declarations, and many scientists organized themselves around this idea, and many of the big institutions, they approached the publishers and said, this is not good anymore. We're not going to first do the research and then give it to you and then pay you for having us read it afterwards, like the Max Planck Institute in Germany and several other big ones. They got together and approached the company so that the situation could be changed. But it's not so easy, and there's many ways of doing it. You can keep those publishing companies, and then you can do something that's called golden open access, and that's when you as an author will pay Elsevier or Springer or another company for publishing your work in a journal. Now it exists in mixed systems, so if you want to publish in biodiversity and conservation, it's Springer Verlag in Germany. Then they ask you when just before they, when it has been reviewed and accepted, just before they start producing the paper, do you want open access, and then you have to pay X amount of dollars, and then it will be anyone will be able to download it from the web page without paying those $39.65. So that's one way. The other way is green open access, and that's organized in a little bit different way. It's your institution will have an agreement with the publisher that they can deposit an electronic version of your paper in a database, a repository, or a website. And again, the physicists and chemists were much more ahead of us, so they had this one that's called RC, and that's one at I think it's Cornell, does he say? Anyway, one of the big American universities, they have developed this, and they have a lot of papers deposited there from the site, so you can download them. And sometimes they even deposit the paper there as soon as they submit them. But of course you have to be careful, because some journals, they don't do it. So what's the advantage of open access? Of course, there is economic aspect that I mentioned, and the fairness of having access to information which is relevant to you. But as an author, it means that these are more easy to access, and therefore they are cited more often. And also, it means that your work is available to others more quickly than it would be if you waited for a more conventional publication. And the other thing is that it has this long time effect of that your work will be seen and cited by others. So this trend of open access is a growing trend, and more options increase. And in some areas of physics, for instance, they only do open access. In biology, it is still a limited amount, but it's changing also. And if you want to see about some statistics, you can go to this directory of open access journals, and you can see that already over 10,000 journals which have open access, and you can find them on this web page. Also, many of those who fund the research, now they put up requirements for the researchers that they should, or they must publish their results in open access, because they don't want this game of paying for the research and then paying for having to purchase it again when they need to read the paper. So that's becoming more and more common. And the publishers, of course, they're not stupid, so they're following up on this and developing lots of systems, and they try to keep earning a lot of money even in the open access system. But it's there. And many publishers permit self-archiving also nowadays. You see many people who make PDFs of their papers and put them on their own personal web page, so that anyone who can access the web page can download it. And that's legal in some cases, not quite legal in other cases, but it's moving more and more in that direction, that the publishers accept it. So, open access is here to stay, and you will be more and more exposed to it. In my opinion, it's a good thing, and it's something which will make our science more visible and more accessible to more people, and more quickly accessible also. So So follow up on it, but there are many pitfalls and there's many ways where you can still be cheated by the company. So do read the writing with small before you sign, their forms. Thank you.
Yeah, we still have 10 minutes.
Henrik, did you mention that some open access journals that normally charge quite a lot of money for publication, like for example PLOS ONE, they have a list of countries. When the first author comes from those countries, you can actually get it for free. I don't know if Colombia is on that list or other South American countries are. It's not? Okay, Colombia is not, but there are people from other countries here. So.
Can I tell you that? Yeah. But then also, if you can justify your case too, those journals, they'll also give it to you for free. So I published in BMC, and I didn't have any money left, and I said, hey, I want to publish this paper. And then I think that we not only had a reduced fee, I think that we did not pay for that because none of us had funding to pay for a palm paper at BMC, and we were all at American institutions.
It's always worth trying.
It's always worth trying. And then I think the other interesting aspect, not to go on and on about open access, but what also happens with the money making is it's the highly funded labs that pay to have their paper open access, and then they're disproportionately cited, right? So that if I had, I don't have, let's say I don't have funding, so I can't make my, systematic biology paper open access, but Wolf can. So Wolf's paper is going to be, I'm just saying, hypothetically. And I find that happens a lot in big labs, that big labs, all their papers are open access. And it's kind of unfair to people that don't have an extra $2,000 to make that paper open access. So I think that the golden open access is also like another catch-22 or a double-edged sword. It's not quite necessarily fair, particularly if you're a PhD student with a really cool result. You're like, wow, I really wish I had